All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Tuesday, November 12th, and the Texas Longhorns are the number 3 team in the country, according to the latest AP polls. And I think later tonight is whenever they will release the college football playoff polls. So we will give you all the updates for that as the Texas Longhorns beat the Florida Gators in a complete beatdown 49-17 over the weekend. We will give our final thoughts on that, not that episode, but on that game. And also, we're going to go down memory lane a little bit because for guys like me and Jake, we're 30 years old and we don't really have a heated rivalry between Arkansas. Now, in Monday's press conference with Sarkisian, he mentioned, yes, they've already said that they hate Texas more than they like themselves. The fan base does hate Texas, and I needed to have a little history refresher in my brain as to why that is the case. So we're going to go down the Arkansas-Texas history for you a little bit, just for a refresher to get you pumped up for Saturday's game. And lastly, but firstly, we are going to mention Texas has their first SEC championship in program history. Congratulations to the women's soccer team beating South Carolina 1-0. They win the SEC tournament. They will enter the national tournament as the 4 seed, which is the College Cup, and they will play Boston. And it was a game-winning goal by Carly Montgomery in the 79th minute. And Jake, what a great way to end the first regular season of the sports year in women's soccer, and for that to be ending in an SEC championship.
Yeah, I mean, for athletic director Chris Del Conte, this just sends a message right away. And I know some people will go, well, it's women's soccer. It's not as big of a revenue sport, but it doesn't matter for an athletic director. It's all about winning in every single sport. And so winning an SEC title in the first sport that you could win an SEC title in, it's got to feel pretty good for CDC. And, I think all Longhorn fans should at least be keeping track of how they do in the tournament, which they got a 4 seed in, which from what I was reading was a little bit disappointing. They were expecting a 2 or at worst a 3 seed and got a 4. For those of you who don't know, because I didn't know, quite frankly, it works basically like the March Madness tournament. There's 64 teams. So you do the math with a 4 seed as winning an SEC title, probably not quite as high as you'd expect. But it'll be fun to kind of keep track of how they're doing. And regardless, obviously, to win a conference championship in their first season is a big deal for not only themselves, but the whole athletic department.
And to make that back-to-back conference champions as well. Something the football team is trying to do is they leave their footprint in the Big 12 forever as their final year in the Big 12, winning the conference championship a season ago, and then going and turning around and winning it in the SEC is
and
pretty
volleyball's
impressive.
Still in it too, as well. They're still. I know they went on that 3-game losing skid, but I think they're only a game back, so they're right in it too. So you have Texas women's soccer defending their conference title just in a new conference. You have volleyball attempting to do the same. And then obviously football, we're going to get into it later, but they are in a very good position after this weekend to have an opportunity to also do that.
And women's basketball as well. They are 1-0, and they beat Southeastern Missouri 119-47, put up triple digits, and it was a heck of a night for the return of Rori Harmon. Welcome back. 10 points, 7 assists, 4 rebounds. And then the freshman phenom from a season ago that led the way while Rori was out, Madison Booker, 18 points, 11 assists, 6 rebounds, finished her night with a double-double, and really probably got your athletic trainers some minutes in this game towards the end. And so just a good, solid outing from the number 4 team in the country, Jake.
Yeah, number 4 team in the country, second highest ranked team in the SEC. I don't think anyone will be surprised to hear that South Carolina is the number 1 team in the nation. Well deserved there, but that this women's basketball team is another team that certainly is capable of winning a conference championship. Obviously, they're going to be big underdogs. South Carolina is a little bit of a juggernaut. But it's just fun to as we dive into more of these sports. Obviously, women's basketball, I think, something we both have watched and kept track of closely. But to pay more close attention to volleyball during the regular season as opposed to waiting towards the postseason and seeing what women's soccer does, and now maybe keeping a closer eye, watching more games of women's basketball as the season goes along. It's really fun just to be more in tune with the program as a whole and see what a competitive athletic department that CDC has built, where they are just constantly trying to win conference and national titles in basically every single sport.
And that's really what this whole podcast is about. This is Texas Longhorns, All in Horns, your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns. This is not just a football podcast. Now, it will primarily revolve around football because football's king, let's be honest with you. But it'll be men's basketball. When March Madness comes around, we probably won't even utter the words football, be completely honest with you, whenever the season's wrapped up in late January. Jake, also, we're going to be in tune with softball, baseball when that gets going as well. And like you said, this podcast, this platform gives us more of not only an excuse to stay in tune with it, but the opportunity to be much more involved than really we ever were. And I'm really looking forward to it as the seasons progress and get into the thick of it. And we're only just at the very beginning of this. But anyway, we wanted to remind everybody that this is not just a football podcast. We're going to cover all Texas Longhorn sports. And so we're looking forward to what the women's soccer does after winning the first SEC title in Texas athletics history, and what women's basketball continues to do as well. Jake, let's move into football season. That's why everybody clicked on the link and the video in the first place. Final thoughts on the Florida game real quick, and then we're going to dive in and give you kind of a history lesson following this conversation on Texas-Florida, on the history between Texas and Arkansas. If you're a younger fan like Jake and I, you're probably not overly familiar with why it's a rivalry or really the history behind it. And so it's a nice refresher to know what we're getting into Saturday. And it kind of, honestly, reading up on it, I kind of got pumped up a little bit more than I would have otherwise.
Yeah, if anything, I've heard a couple of the players talk about this week of being, they remember what happened a few years ago. I'll just put it this way. There are still some players who were there for that first year that are still around. Alfred Collins is one that talked about, we went in there, they thought they were going to whip us, and they did whip us. And so I know some of them are probably Sark probably won't do it as much, but I bet a Collins and some of these other guys that were around for that are probably going to be a little bit more loud towards the team this week of this game. It's a little bigger than just your typical game, because Arkansas, A, they really hate Texas, and then B, I'm sure those guys that were around for that want redemption, not only for themselves, but to redeem Sarkisian. I went back and looked at that box score. I forgot how bad that was. They had 59 yards of offense for the game.
That's bad. That's really bad. I mean, Texas was dominated up front, and it was kind of the announcement of Texas is moving to the SEC. Texas goes into Arkansas to play their what could be a tune-up SEC type game, and Texas got ran through, and it was dominated on the line of scrimmage by Arkansas, and they were much bigger, they were much faster, and every aspect, every way, shape, or form of that game, Arkansas was better, and they looked better back in 2014 in the Texas Bowl against with the Charlie Strong-led Texas team. So it's been a while since Texas has felt like a better, well, not a better program, but in a head-to-head matchup has been the better team.
Yeah, I mean, it was wild watching Texas line up against Arkansas in that game and just look like the smaller team. Look inferior talent-wise at the line of scrimmage, because they were inferior. And I think Sarkisian already knew. He had made comments leading into, this is not the team I would have built. Just small little statements that stood out as to, why do we only have 7 scholarship linemen or 8 scholarship offensive linemen, whatever it was, and 50 scholarship wide receivers? And that was the confirmation of, I got a lot of work to do. And obviously to work he went with what he's built. And to further keep bragging about Steve Sarkisian, something we didn't bring up that I want to bring up during our final thoughts. Sarkisian is a wizard. Because he put on probably the greatest misdirection play I've ever seen.
We didn't even get a chance to really touch on it, Jake.
No, despite the fact that both you and I have probably watched it 100 to 200 times.
Jake, between you and I, how many times have we sent each other that play in various different forms between text messages between you and I? And
Yeah.
it's just been a constant, like, hey, in case you haven't seen this play, here you go again, and we've watched it. So how many times have you watched it? Yes.
Yeah. I mean, the fake sweep to the fake counter to the actual reverse, and then using the fake sweeper. And then I don't know if, I don't know how many times everyone who's watching this has watched that play, but look at what Quinn has to do. He's got to be a little bit of a magician himself back there, pulling the fakes, staying in rhythm to be able to pitch it back to the reverse man. But Gunnar Helm basically had to do a spin move in the backfield because he's got a fake going to the left, get the whole defense moving that way, then spun back. So he's the other lead blocker to go along with the fake sweep that started it all. And so you get the offense kind of going to the right, but everyone thinks those are the decoys, but they end up being the lead blockers. And then when you got someone as fast as Isaiah Bond, who has that breakaway speed, that's just not something I'd want to have to prepare for. And if you're, it doesn't matter for Texas that they've showed that play, because that's such a unique play and such a different, and you can run different looks out of it. You could hand it off to the running back on the counter. You could do just the flat out sweep to start it. You don't just have to run that. So now you have to prepare for 3 plays out of one look, essentially.
You could play action the entire thing and have Gunnar Helm running a seam route down the middle of the field. You could have
a wheel route with the sweep. I mean, you can have all types of different
so many different
out of that.
Yeah. And Jake, I think I've coined this term in my head. It makes sense. Tell me if I'm wrong, but like if college football had it in their video game, it would be called a double fake off tackle end around.
It would be something.
Is that fair? I feel like that's kind of what happened.
What it is. I mean, that would be the shortest way to put it.
Right.
And I'd be curious. You won't get it from Sarkisian, especially in season, but maybe at the end of the season. Yeah. I just want to know what the name of the play is for them, like actually in the huddle, what Quinn is calling, what he's hearing in his helmet communication. Because I'm sure it's got to be a pretty long name, especially for the college game. But that was just so fun to see, especially with both of us being fans of the Dallas Cowboys. We get to see way more innovation on Saturdays than we do on Sundays.
Yeah. And Jake, that does, when Sark had his presser on Monday, he talked about what his coaching staff, or actually this was the post-game press conference. They asked him what that play call was and how that came about and why call it and all the things. And he said, sometimes me and the coaching staff, me and the offensive crew, we sit down and we just kind of just bounce ideas off. A lot of them don't ever get actually scripted into a game plan. And we just are like, man, wouldn't it be crazy if it could work like this? They actually drew it out, designed it in one of these kind of what if meetings. They ran it in practice and they all looked at each other and they said, did that just work as well as we thought it could have worked? And so then they called it in the game and a point in time too, where the game wasn't like completely out of reach by any means. And so, and it worked as well as it did. I would not be surprised if we don't see this later on in the season. I'm talking maybe an SEC championship or playoff game.
Yeah. Or at Texas A&M, against a front like that. You're going to probably have to do some misdirection. They have a very good front seven, a very strong defensive line. I definitely think they could run some things out of that, because I imagine you're going to want to run sideline to sideline in a game like that. So it just gives another thing for not only is it fun, just really fun to watch, but it also really does give the defense just another thing to prepare for. And then also having to understand that you could get multiple looks out of that same exact design that you have to prepare for. And then also, how fun would it be to be a fly on the wall or just get to sit in there and listen to them when they're spitballing those ideas? I'd pay a lot of money just to listen.
Oh, absolutely. And Jake, talk a little bit more of anything that stood out to you in this Florida game. For me anyway, it was just this team, when they want to be a physical team, they can be physical, and I'm talking in on the offensive side of the ball. Having Jarrett Gibson be the primary ball handler or the ball carrier, and then you kind of mix it up with a little bit of Jaden Blue. Trey Wisner messed up early, and I don't know if that was kind of part of the game plan or if that was the early first drive mistake where they were just like, nope, sorry. Not that he didn't score a touchdown later and get his touches on the receiving side of the ball, but when this team wants to just run an offense and they can run the ball with one of these three running backs, whoever's feeling it, I thought Jaden Blue looked more explosive than he has since he kind of tweaked his ankle against Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, he's just been slowly every week, I feel like, starting to look more himself. I've said it a couple weeks ago. I still think he's the most talented, most capable, most NFL type back that Texas has. And I still stand by that. They're going to need him to look like he did this week. They're going to need him to look like that in these last few games, especially on the road at Arkansas and on the road at A&M. Those are going to be games where you need a Jaden Blue or a Wisner to really stand out. And that's the great thing about having the amount of talent they have at running back is they have all these injuries, yet they still have these highly talented guys that they can kind of go for the hot hand. But I did like the mixing in Gibson. I do think he can be very effective as a short yardage back. I think the main downside to having Gibson in is you're probably telegraphing you're going to try to do some type of run because he is useless in the passing game, both as a blocker and he's just not going to provide what a Wisner or Blue can as far as catching the ball out of the backfield. But the one play I wanted to also mention was Sarkisian going for it on 4th and 1 from his own 24-yard line. Not something I want him to do very much in the future, but I think he was feeling the game of we are the better team. The defense, I trust I trust that we're going to win this game, but I want to send a message to the players that I believe in you to execute in a situation where we shouldn't probably be going for it. And then that led to a touchdown drive. And rather than starting out the game, missed field goal, then punt, they started with the missed field goal, and then they went down and scored a touchdown on that very drive. I thought that was more of not something he's going to look to do if they're playing at A&M in a close game. He's not going to be going for it on 4th and 1 from his own 24-yard line, but more as a game he felt like he had the opportunity to send a message to the locker room of the confidence he has in them and that he believes in them to execute in a situation where they probably won't be doing that later in later games.
I think Sark told a story in his press conference on Monday about his former head coach. I believe it was at BYU, that or he was a position coach somewhere. I believe it was at BYU when he was at quarterback, and they were kind of just going back and forth. And he said the head coach was very much a CEO type guy where he let coordinators coordinate. He let position coach them. And he was kind of bouncing off, coordinator, what do you want to run? Position coach, what do you want to run? And then they all were bouncing ideas. And he looked at Sark, the quarterback at the time, and he said, Sark, what do you want to run? And he called the play. And Sark said that was the first play call I've ever called in my entire life was in that game. And he was a player. And he said, I learned a lot in that moment. Trust your players, because he said, I never felt more confident running a play than whenever my head coach allowed me to run the play that I wanted to call. And it was on a 4th down. It was a big time decision in the game. And I ran it. We executed it. And what that did for myself and the team around him, he's now implementing that into his own program.
Yeah. I mean, as an offensive lineman, your coach going for it in 4th and 1 with a simple run up the middle when you're on your own 24-yard line. I imagine that instills a lot of confidence in yourself that my coach believes I'm going to blow the guy up in front of me and guarantee that we get this first down. And so I think that sends a big time message to the offensive line, because there's been a lot of talk about, the lack of run game to a point, at least consistency in the run game, which is true to a point, but they're just not going to run the ball that much with the injuries that have happened and the style team this is. But I just thought that was a big time play early in the game that kind of laid everything out in front of them to have a 35-0 lead at halftime. I think if they don't go for that there, it would have been maybe a little bit of an uglier first half, but I think that really got the team going.
And Jake, the Texas Longhorns in the last 2 seasons now are 20-3, and those losses coming against a 12th ranked Oklahoma team, a 2nd ranked Washington team, and a 5th ranked Georgia team. One of those being at home, 2 of those being on neutral sided fields. And Jake, 2 more games. What's the big number here that Texas fans and Texas as a football team needs to get in their last 3 remaining football games to basically secure, no matter what happens for the remainder of that time, to secure a spot in the playoffs?
I think 2-1. I mean, maybe if they got blown out by Arkansas or blown out by Kentucky, they wouldn't make it. But if they go 2-1 and they lose at A&M, which I do not want to happen. Believe me. We think the comment section was bad after Georgia. Imagine having a full cult come after you after a loss, especially with some of the clips that you have with me saying on this very podcast and on social media. I'm sure I'm in a lot of A&M fans' bookmarks.
Yeah.
So I do not want that to happen.
And
but
rightfully
if it
so.
did happen, I do think Texas would still be in the playoff. I just, with being number 3 in the country, losing to a top 15 team on the road is not going to sink them. And then maybe even losing to an Arkansas or Kentucky in a close game, but winning the other 2, I still don't think that's going to drop them completely out of the CFP rankings. We'll see what they come out as tonight. But if they're number 3 or number 4, I don't see them dropping that far based off how they've ranked other teams.
And they'd have to be, at least in tonight's rankings, they're going to have to be probably the SEC favorite. So being a top 4 team with that first round bye, aside from maybe a Tennessee, if they decide to rank Tennessee ahead, but to win the SEC, surely they're not going to put Georgia as one of the top 4 teams and as a conference champion in the projected bracket.
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I mean,
I would
now
think Texas. I would think it would be I would think it'd be Oregon, Texas, and then it would SMU or Miami as that 3 seed, and then BYU.
Yeah, I mean, probably SMU. I would say SMU, but who knows? They might even not. Honestly, they could knock the ACC team to the 4 seed. And you know something that's getting lost in all this? Why not Boise State to take over the ACC or the Big 12? If BYU drops, now BYU goes undefeated, they will rightfully be a top 4 seed. But if they lose one, I think the committee would be pretty quick to pull the trigger on throwing Boise State in that top 4.
I think a 1-loss SMU would trump a 1-loss Boise State, just for the simple fact of P4. I think that would just be what it is, unfortunately, no matter how you feel about the 2 teams. Boise State, they had a little bit of a struggle bus against Nevada last week. I mean, they won by a touchdown.
No, that is true. I just for some reason the committee has always taken merit into close loss, like moral victories, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And their only loss being a road loss by a last-second field goal to Oregon, I think could play into their hands. Obviously not as much as a win would, but with that being their only loss, they're still definitely in play at the very least.
And you can flip it on its head with SMU. Their 1 loss is against an undefeated BYU team at the beginning of the season. That was a close loss. So, it'll be interesting what they do tonight.
That wasn't playing near the level they are now. They're playing much better. But yeah, I mean, I expect Texas to be in that top 3, top 4 at worst tonight. And with that, it's just hard to. It feels like to get in the playoffs, they need to win 2 of the last 3, and then obviously because Georgia and LSU lost, we went to the weekend hoping one would lose. I figured LSU would lose. I didn't think they would get just absolutely throttled, but guess what? It looked like I might have been stupid there for a week or 2, but I was right. They're frauds.
They're frauds.
Big time frauds. I called it. I was right. Never doubted it. Not even for a second.
Was there was that an elimination game? Not technically.
I mean, yes, LSU. There's no shot they could be in the playoff now.
I think there would be a better 3-loss team that could make it ahead.
They've lost to a bad USC team. They lost to at A&M in a game where A&M pulled their starter and then put in, or 1A starter, 1B starter. I don't know what their deal is, but and then put in Marcel Reed, and then they couldn't stop the quarterback run the entire second half and got just plowed by A&M in the second half. And then they had 2 weeks to prepare for a running quarterback and proceeded to have the same exact thing that happened in the second half of the A&M game happen for an entire game.
At home at night, which is even more embarrassing. All right, Jake, real quick, let's finish the show up. Sark in his press conference on Monday said, I don't know what Darrell Royal did to Arkansas back in the day, but they absolutely hate our guts. And he quoted their head coach earlier in the offseason during SEC press week, which was, we hate them more than we like ourselves. And let's give a little bit of a history lesson, shall we, as to why this is the case. Because for the life of me, I couldn't really ever think of anything as to big significance with me growing up in the last 30 years, other than a couple of bowl appearances, a couple of regular season matchups scheduled here and there. And, you know, it just never seemed like that big of a rivalry, other than there's a town in Texas called Texarkana. And that was really, I was like, what's the deal with that? So first played their game 130 years ago, before conferences were even a thing in 1894. Arkansas hadn't won a game since 1933, so Texas got a pretty big leap on them in the first stretch of games. And then it came down in 1964. I think this is probably when the rivalry actually started, was in 1964. Arkansas won its first and only football national championship against Texas in a barn burner of a game, 14-13. And then just 5 years later, in 1969, it was coined the game of the century. And I think this is really what elevated this rivalry to new heights. On December 6th, President Richard Nixon, that's basically all he's known for in his presidency, right? Flew in to watch the game. At the time, it was the most watched game in television history. Texas won that one 15-14. And more recently, Arkansas has had the better of Texas, but then again, Texas hasn't really been all that great in recent memory. Arkansas has beaten Texas in 2 bowl games that they've played in the 21st century, in 2000 in the Cotton Bowl, and then in 2014 in the Texas Bowl. Arkansas has won the last 2 meetings in 2014 and in 2021, which we already touched on a little bit earlier in this episode. Overall, Texas has beaten Arkansas 56 games to 23 over Arkansas, and the last time Texas won over Arkansas was back in 2008, and they won 52-10. So there's just a little bit of a recap, a little bit of a history lesson between these two squads. The big games, probably the biggest game that's been played in our recent memory was the Cotton Bowl back in 2000. That wasn't a regular season game.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I don't particularly remember that one. I think my memory goes back to about 2003.
Let's just say this. In 2000, I was 6 years old, and I probably didn't pay a hell of a lot of attention to what game was on and how that game went.
Yeah, the crazy thing is you look at the last 2 times Texas has played them. I mentioned they had like 57 or 59 yards in the last matchup. I just went back and looked at the box score from the Texas Bowl. They had 59 yards of offense in that game.
Oh, that game was terrible. I remember watching
under 60 yards of offense in each of the. If that stat holds up, we may not be on air Saturday. We'll skip that one. We'll go on Sunday because we'll say some unsavory things that would get our account banned if that happened. I would not handle that well. I do not. I think they'll have more than 59 yards in this game.
I would be willing to bet my life savings, which isn't a lot by the way, but I would bet my life savings Texas has more than 60 yards of offense come Saturday.
I certainly hope so. I think it's a safe bet this year, but it just that blows my mind because those are like probably the 2 worst offensive games in my entire memory as a Texas fan.
And they both come against
each
Arkansas.
of the last 2 times against Arkansas.
And that's why I have a little bit of PTSD. Anyone who has followed this journey with Jake and I through this season, anyone who's been here since the beginning, first of all, we thank you. Second of all, very early on when we were looking at the Texas schedule, I said, guys, don't overlook the game at Arkansas in Fayetteville. They hate us. Use the term trap. I don't think it's even a trap game. And I just have a little bit of PTSD. That might be a big part of it. But I've always said since the schedule released and I saw that we had to go to Arkansas to play the Razorbacks, I said, man, that's a tough game. That's gonna be a tough game.
Yeah, I mean, we both agreed on that. And then also Arkansas's not awful. They have games where they look awful. But they've also had several games where they've looked really good, and we're going to dive into the numbers on tomorrow's episode. So I don't want to spoil anything, but they do have a good offense. There are things about that football team that could give the Longhorns issues, just like with just about any team. All these teams at the Power 4 level are capable, unless their name is Oklahoma, and so we will dive into that. But it's a big game on Saturday, and I'm thankful it's not a night game because that would just make the environment that much more crazy. But that stadium is going to be sold out. It is going to be rocking. I'm sure there's going to be a good amount of orange, but it's going to feel like a little bit of a rivalry game, I'm sure, especially with it being at Arkansas.
Yep. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode, Jake. Again, everybody, we come out with these episodes Tuesday through Friday leading up to the game on Saturday at noon, and that is on YouTube and where all podcasts can be heard. Saturday, we let the football dictate our schedule, and we give our immediate reaction following the game as soon as we possibly can. And Jake, I'm Tanner Carlson for Jake Jimerson. This is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns on All In Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. And with all that being said, hook 'em.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.